Something that has never come easy to me is writing. I've got okay ideas, I'm pretty good in the beginning, but I finish about as good as straight women. Up top? See, I can picture a character or a scene, maybe even sometimes an entire world, but the longer I stay inside of the idea, the more it just seems to get lost. At some point, the story stops moving forward and I hit a wall. And eventually I'm left staring at the end, realizing I have no idea how to get there. I filled journals and notes apps and scrap pieces of paper with ideas that never really went anywhere. Not because they were bad ideas, but because I didn't know how to end them. And I think a lot of people can relate to this, having an idea you care about, something that feels promising, and slowly watching it collapse under its own weight because it doesn't know how to finish. Like your mom. Television takes this exact problem and ramps it up to an impossible level. Because how are you supposed to plan for a story that might be 4, 5, 6 seasons when you don't even know if you're going to get the second one? You don't know how much time you have. You don't know which characters are going to stay, whether the network's going to pull the plug as soon as ratings dip. So instead of writing towards an ending, a lot of shows write for survival. And that might explain why so many TV shows start good and end worse than Dream's face reveal. So today I want to talk about why TV endings fail so often, what usually goes wrong, and why sticking the landing matters more than almost anything else. Spoiler warning for all of these, major plot points will be discussed in this video. I love TV. I love it more than any other form of media by far. So when I hear a show ended poorly, I don't just cringe, I cry a little bit. The real problem with TV that ends badly, whether it's one episode or an entire last season, it means that the entire show is stained forever. You can't rewatch it without anticipating the disappointment that you know is coming. You can't discuss it with your friends without the dreaded, yeah, but that ending was bad. Ending a TV show is insanely hard for like a million reasons. Writers rarely know how long they'll get to tell the story. Characters evolve over the years. Stakes escalate, budgets fluctuate, writers and directors leave, actors quit, fans' expectations shift, sometimes literally overnight. And then there's the worst one. Business always comes before art. Yay, capitalism. But some shows run into a slightly different issue. They run out of source material. Game of Thrones is the most obvious example of this. George R.R. Martin's book series, A Song of Ice and Fire, was still in progress? Is still in progress? Who the fuck knows? The first 5 seasons of the show basically followed the books pretty closely, but eventually the series caught up to and then surpassed the available materials from the book. And then the writers, who were primarily adapting someone else's work, all of a sudden had to conclude dozens of character arcs, including some of the most complicated, morally gray, and politically intertwined arcs ever on TV. This was no small task. Not even the original author of the books has managed to do this, so you could say that they had their work cut out for them. So what happened to one of the best shows of the 21st century? Slowly, after season 5, things began to unravel. By season 8, the people making it seemed less invested in crafting a satisfying conclusion, but rather we were just getting it done. And the result? The finale felt rushed, chaotic, and to many fans almost insulting. Characters acted out of line with the development they had been having the entire series. Themes were abandoned. The philosophical tension that had defined the series, power versus morality, was thrown out the window for shock value. Kinda like Bran. The things I do for love. Why stay true to the characters and the themes of the show when we could throw it all away and go home? In all seriousness, writing is hard, and endings are the hardest part. But there's a few things that need to happen for an ending to feel satisfying, and we got none of them. This video does a great job of really laying out endings when it comes to writing, but the video basically says there are 3 things you need to do in the ending. They all have to do with stakes that have been set up over the course of your story. There's 3 different types of stakes. External stakes, which is what the character wants. Internal stakes, which is the relationships and the emotional desires the character have. And philosophical stakes, which is what the character believes in. In Game of Thrones, even though there is a huge cast of characters, most of these line up for everyone. The characters want the throne. It's their external stakes, what they want. They want to protect the ones they love, internal stakes. And the central philosophical tension that I mentioned earlier is really power versus morality. And yet, when the ending came, these stakes were ignored. Characters acted as if their goals didn't matter. People killed loved ones for no reason. The throne, driving the plot of the entire series, the goddamn name of the show, suddenly seemed irrelevant. Chaos reigned, and not the good kind, the kind of chaos that makes you feel alive, but the chaos for shock value. This isn't just about Game of Thrones, this is about a reoccurring problem in television. When the journey you've been following for years suddenly stops respecting the rules, the characters, the stakes, it feels like a betrayal. And the longer you've been invested, the sharper the betrayal stings. When a show succeeds for a multiple season, it builds a relationship with its audience. We trust the world, the rules, the characters. And when that trust is broken in the final hours, it's not just the story that suffers, it's the audience too. And sometimes that disappointment lingers longer than the show itself, leaving us hesitant to ever revisit it at all. Endings are the hardest part of writing, yes, but they're also the part that defines the show's legacy. A poor ending can undo years of great storytelling. This isn't a video about Game of Thrones, but I do think it's a great example of how a show can betray its audience. More than stakes, I think betraying your audience is a better way to understand where it all falls apart for a lot of shows. TV is fighting an uphill battle. Sometimes they know the plot points they want to hit, or a major theme, or even an ending, but sometimes getting there is the hardest part. House of Cards lost its main character and tried to go on. That went about as well as the name of the show. How I Met Your Mother is a story about a man telling his children how he met their now dead mother, and then has him running off in the end with their aunt who he couldn't stop talking about the entire time. Doesn't that feel like a little bit too much? It's incredible how quickly a show can make the entire point of it fall flat. You might as well have just said, "It's all a dream," and went home. When you lose the purpose of your story, when you lose what you were trying to say all these years, it feels cheap and lazy. Suddenly, the things that made the story feel meaningful vanish into thin air. It's not fun, it's not clever, it's a punch to the gut to anyone who's been along for the ride. The inconsistency, this change in the status quo at the end, is the thing that drives audiences nuts. The switch up at the very end makes the story feel shaky, makes it feel like it never really had any idea what it was doing in the first place, and everything that the fans have been getting out of it kind of starts to feel meaningless. So when creators skimp out or half-bake the ending to subvert expectations, you manage to screw up the show right when it was supposed to come to its final meaning. No one's favorite show has a shitty ending, and if it does, they make sure to tell you. Knowing when and how to end a show might be more important than ever starting it in the first place. Because a show's legacy doesn't come from how it begins, it's how it leaves us. Oh my god, a dead horse! Should we beat it? Yeah. I think the easiest way shows do this is by going too long. For example,
And that's what you missed on Glee.
Glee was basically a musical sitcom. The cast had slight shifts, but for the most part, the episodes had the same core cast at the same high school with the same themes. It was predictable, but comforting. But the problem with the show like Glee is that a bunch of adults pretending to be high schoolers can only go on so many years before the characters need to graduate. But the show wasn't that kind that constantly rotated in new talent. So when season 4 rolls around and they all of a sudden start smashing in new characters, and also make a second main location for some of the legacy characters in New York, well, now you've completely lost the entire structure of your sitcom. I loved Glee. It's something my dad and I did when I was growing up, watching it come out every single week, but it probably went on 2 or 3 seasons too long. What should have ended on a high note drags on, shoving in fan service and plot threads no one asked for. It's the difference between a satisfying ending and a messy, let's just throw everyone in a montage and hope it works, finale. When you throw away the ending, the journey becomes pointless. And the problem with a pointless journey is that that's the exact story television is trying to tell. It's the climb. It doesn't matter if a show has 2 seasons or 22. There is a point where creators need to know when the story ran its course. Now, I have to be honest. The real reason I wanted to create this video was because about a month ago the ending of Stranger Things finally happened. The crazy season 5 that was supposed to end one of the largest shows of the century and is by far Netflix's most watched show of all time. Netflix feels like the big daddy of streaming, the one that really made it mainstream. So their flagship show coming to an end after one very long decade should have been an amazing celebration, especially considering it cost nearly $500 million, right? But to no one's real surprise, it was a bit of a dud. Now, even though I made this entire video as a kind of a where are they now when it comes to this show failing, I have to be honest and say, I never got past season 3. Yep, you heard me. I am on here complaining about a show that I've never finished. But I think that says a lot to begin with. When the show first came out, I was still in high school. I watched the first season sitting on my parents' couch. And if I was to watch the final season as it came out, I would be sitting on the couch in my own house with my husband. Do you see the disconnect there? High school me loved the show. The retro 80s setting, the aesthetic, and vibe were amazing. I liked the young characters fighting monsters and going on adventures together. But as the next 2 seasons came out, I found myself enjoying it less and less. And I didn't find myself driven to turn it on for the 4th season when it finally came out. It felt like the show was getting convoluted, and although I enjoyed many of the characters and the plot points, it also started to feel like the show was running out of steam. There was obviously still the overarching mystery of the Upside Down and what happened to Will, but then there was the Russians and the government and characters being introduced just to die, and I found myself longing for the feeling that the first season gave me. It also felt like the same people who started watching this show as kids kind of grew out of it, like me. The only people in my life I know that have watched it is my dad, which I think is all that needs to be said about what happened to the viewers as the show dragged its feet to the finish line. To me, this is a show that perfectly exemplifies not knowing when to stop.
Stop it. Get some help.
The original show was written and pitched as a 1-season show, and although it wouldn't have gained Netflix and the actors and all the people involved as much money, I think it should have stayed the way it was. I think the first season, or maybe a second, could have wrapped up the stories and questions and really been something special when it comes to a viewer's experience. But I don't think TV is really for viewers. I think TV is made for consumption now, and those are not the same thing. When art, or TV in this case, is made for its viewers, I think it's an experience. It has meaning in it. It wants to satisfy the audience that's viewing it. But I think what's more important today in this late-stage capitalism hellscape we call home is views and clicks and consuming the media, but not really caring how it got those views. I think the metrics and money of a streaming service having a hit show with the hopes that people have forgotten about their subscriptions between the terrible seasons that they've put out every few years is Netflix and most of the media's goal. I think the part that's difficult from a creative standpoint is that TV isn't really made to end. Both from a business and art perspective, they could kind of go on forever. There is nothing stopping you from continuing a story even when there's nothing left to say. But I think the art of ending a show all comes from knowing that there has to be an end. And if I was producing a show, I'd want it to go down as great. Not great with the caveat of, well, except for the end. I think it's why I never finished the show and why I don't think I ever will. I want my time to be used towards shows I think actually care. Shows that feel like art even when it feels like TV's moving closer to trash. It's not a positive in my eyes that Stranger Things was a never-ending story. In our modern media landscape, people love going back to rewatch shows or watching old shows for the first time after they're fully done, aka binging. So creating more for the sake of it and not for the purpose of the story can be very obvious when witnessing it from a binging perspective. A great example of a show ending when it could have kept going is Fleabag. The creator and star Phoebe Waller-Bridge made the choice to end the show after 2 critically acclaimed seasons. That's integrity. It's why the ending resonates.
It'll pass.
Because it respects the character, the story, the audience. I would rather have perfect seasons that tell the exact story she wanted to tell, and never go a single season or even episode more than she believed was necessary or right. As a fan of any show, it's hard to see it end. And wishing for more of the same characters or stories is something we often do, but I think we have to be careful what we wish for because sometimes fewer is better. Personally, most shows with a good premise and theme do not need to be more than 5 or 6 seasons, unless you want to start feeling more like a soap opera than television.
6 seasons and a movie!
I think Abed was only a little bit off. The Sopranos was 6 seasons. The Wire was 5. Breaking Bad, 5. Game of Thrones should have been 5. Better Call Saul, 6. Succession, 4. Arrested Development should have been 4. Fewer seasons often preserves the stakes, keeps character growth meaningful, and ensures the story never overstays its welcome. The point is, more doesn't equal more, and giving us 22 seasons of a sad lady being sad when the show has an overarching story of one person means it's hard to keep things fresh and enjoyable. Shows often have to up the stakes every season. For example, in Breaking Bad, the season 1 finale had Jesse and Walt meeting with Tuco to sell their product, and they were terrified as Tuco kills or maybe badly injures one of his men during the trade. By the end of season 2, Walt purposely watches Jesse's girlfriend die of a drug overdose right next to him, which leads to an entire plane full of people dying. I think the stakes went up a little bit. Escalation works if it respects internal logic, character growth, and thematic consistency. I can't tell you how many times I've heard people discuss Walt's character development and change, and they talk about how slowly it happened to the point you didn't even realize you started to root against him, but it's clear by season 2 that he's already tipping into something bigger than any of us realize. And yet the show keeps the stakes high. It stays impactful, but adding more seasons to its run wouldn't have made the story better, just longer. A bad ending doesn't just fail. It retroactively changes the way we understand everything that came before it. It reframes the journey, the characters, and even the time we spent watching it. Suddenly, moments that felt meaningful feel hollow, and setups feel pointless. And that's a heavy thing for an ending to do, because television doesn't ask for 2 hours of your life like a movie. It asks for years. When we start a TV show, we're entering into an unspoken agreement. We give it our time, our attention, and our emotional investment, and in return, we trust the story to know where it's going. Not every answer needs to be perfect, and not every character needs a happy ending, but there does need to be intentionality. There needs to be a sense that the story understood itself well enough to know when it's finished. I think that's where so many shows fall apart. Not because writers suddenly forgot how to write, but because television as an industry isn't designed around endings. It's designed around continuation, around engaging metrics, renewals, cliffhangers, and keeping you watching just one more episode, one more season, one more year. Completion is almost treated like a failure. If the show ends, it can't make us any more money. That's why so many shows don't collapse at the beginning. They collapse when you ask them what it was all for.
We won the war, what was it all for?
They go on too long. They chase shock instead of truth. They betray their own rules and characters and themes in the name of surprise or relevance. And when it happens, it doesn't feel bold, it feels desperate. What makes this especially frustrating is that we know good endings are possible. We've seen them. We've seen shows choose restraint, choose clarity, choose to walk away while the story may still have something to say. Those endings don't always make people happy, but they feel honest and earned. They respect the audience enough to say this is where it ends and this is why. Because TV isn't just content. At least it doesn't feel like it when it's good. It becomes part of our lives. Maybe that's why endings are so hard. Ending something means committing. It means deciding what the story was about. And that's a scary thing in a system that rewards endlessness. But the shows we remember forever aren't the ones that lasted the longest. They're the ones that knew when to stop. Stories don't need to go on forever. They just need to end like they knew what they were doing the whole time. I'm your average viewer. Thanks for watching.